Hey everybody, it's Elaine, and today I'm going to be discussing the graphic novel Nimona, which is by Noelle Stevenson. Our guest today is Jeremy. Say hi, Jer.
Hello.
And we have a few participants as well, Luke, Geneva, and Dr. Schaefer. Nimona discusses the life of the title character, Nimona, who has admired Ballister Blackheart's evil genius for a number of years, which prompts her to offer her service as his sidekick. He reluctantly agrees to take her as an apprentice after he realizes that she is a shapeshifter. Together, they wreak havoc on the kingdom until one day Nimona discovers the institution of law enforcement and heroics top secret plans and realizes, with Ballister's help, that they are a threat to the kingdom. Together, they band together to try and rescue the kingdom, but their label as the kingdom's evil characters really stands in their way. And the question that the book asks is this label enough to keep them from accomplishing their goal? So I know both Jeremy and I have read this graphic novel, and we're just going to take a moment to give a review, what we liked about the novel, what we didn't like. Do you want to start, Jer, with what you liked?
Sure. I really like the setting. I think it's kind of a cool blending of like medieval with like futuristic technology, and it's kind of unique in that there's not a lot of like literature, graphic novels, or other mediums that kind of express that kind of a setting. I also thought the characters, like the central characters to the story, are really strong, and I like the dynamics between them. Um, like even on multiple rereads through the graphic novel, it like really keeps my interest because of the interactions with the characters, and they express a lot through just basically mostly dialogue and pictures, and it's really well done. um, yeah, and some of the like kind of like the magic that's touched on and the technology that's touched on, which is almost like magic, kind of how it's expressed, I kind of like that too.
I actually thought it was interesting that you liked the setting so much because I found it a little disorienting. The kingdom's never named, first of all, which I thought was an interesting choice. It's like, is this a real place? Is it made up? I mean, I assumed it was made up because everything else in the novel is made up, but I'm not certain if it's, based on anything or kingdom of any sort that's reality. Um, and I actually found the fact that it had both elements of medieval times, like people running around in armor and carrying swords, and then having things like refrigerator and pizza deliveries and board games and TV, kind of disorienting. I was like, when is this set? We don't have these things. Like, this is weird. I really liked that it was funny. Like, it cracked a lot of jokes all the time. Like, I actually laughed reading the book. And I thought that the main characters, and this is really important, were both likable and relatable. Because I find that sometimes when I read, the characters are just really boring, Mary Sue's, and I don't care what happens to them. And I feel like, especially because this novel is geared for young adults, it's important to have relatable characters because they want and need to feel that these people are like them and they can use them as a guideline to like help them through their lives, essentially, because it brings up some important issues. Like for example, Nimona is really impulsive. She's also ridiculously enthusiastic about her job, which is kind of weird when you think about it. I don't know anyone who's like, "Oh my god, work!" Like it's just odd. And she's sarcastic. And Ballister is interesting too because he's like misunderstood. He has all these morals, like he won't kill anyone, but he's the bad guy, which is just weird. And I also like that it was fast paced. Those were my main things. Was there anything you didn't like about the book?
um I mean, when I first like opened it, the first time I read it, the artistic style kind of like, because it's very simplistic, especially early on. You can see that there's kind of almost an evolution of the art style as you kind of read through it.
That's
Um, the drawings are kind of simple in the beginning, and they never really get all that complex. But then you just get immersed in it, and it kind of you realize that almost more detailed drawings would almost kind of take away from it. Um,
that.
and I mean, the story, I mean, there's some kind of like tropey bits, but beyond that, there's not really a lot to dislike about it. I like to see more of it.
I would like a sequel too. It's really, really good. Yeah, I think the first time I read it too, I found it a little jumpy in the beginning. Like it was kind of disorienting. And then like a lot of graphic novels, the panels aren't uniform. They're all different sizes, and some of them are kind of small and hard to read. And this fact is kind of compounded by the fact that Stevenson chose to write in all the words by hand instead of using a computer, which would have kept everything uniform. Um, so there was that. And then the other thing that is both kind of good and bad is that there's a really limited color palette. They're really, really dark
Yeah.
colors, like predominantly, like here's like a page. These are probably the most commonly used ones, but they're very vivid. Like they're really saturated on the page. So they're clear, but they're just dark. Um,
There's a lot of sorry to interrupt. There's a lot of like they have a lot of scenes where there's a lot of the same colors.
yeah,
Like a lot of the institute scenes, like I'll try and pull this up right here. Um they kind of use a lot of greens and grays and like muted yellows all together, which
yeah,
is, I mean, I guess it's kind of trying to denote like where they are, but that doesn't really carry through because a lot of the same colors are used in other locations too. So, I mean, it could have been a little bit more poppy if it was like less kind of like earthy in tone because like all the colors are very like earthy colors. Um, and that's coming from somebody who like I read a lot of comic books and things, so they're usually a lot of poppy colors, like really bright contrasts and crisp lines and stuff, and this is kind of the opposite of that, but that doesn't detract too much.
no, it's still a good story, which I think is what's really important. Um, is that everything you have to say for the review? Great. So obviously, Nimona isn't a quote traditional novel with, prose and long paragraphs and chapters. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing. There are a lot of things that a graphic novel, because of its very nature, does better than a traditional novel, or it has strengths that a regular novel doesn't. I think it's important that we take some time to discuss that because a lot of people don't feel like comics or graphic novels are real books. They kind of look down upon because they're quote cartoons, but it's really not a good way to look at these books. It's a really nice medium. So I want to take some time discussing that. Does anyone want to start the conversation?
I guess I'll start. I read comic books for a really long time. Probably to like, oh gosh, the end of high school or something, like right before I started college. Um, and I didn't find them to be like demeaning or anything because I still read just as many books. So, and like I found them just to be different, and it was fine. Like they weren't necessarily easy reads sometimes because sometimes I would miss some things. Like I used to read the Maximum Ride um, graphic novels, and I found them to be like really fun and interesting, and I really liked the story. So yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
What about Luke or Jeremy? Do you have anything to add?
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
mean, good.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, um, I mean, I really like comics. And I mean, you can see I got the thing in the background there, but the I think it just kind of when you look at a novel, there's a lot of different ways you can look at somebody's writing and how they express themselves. There's like the straight prose that they use. There's the language that they use, like the type of language, whether it's simplistic or complex. There's like how they arrange it on the page visually. And those are all kind of ways that you can like see the author kind of trying to put themselves into it. And through comics, it just adds a whole nother layer to it because now you're getting to see artwork and you're getting to see sometimes artists and like writers of comic books will use the different ways that they draw or that they arrange it if they're not the one actually drawing it but they're the one setting it up. Different art styles be used to enhance emotions or to punctuate scenes or to do a lot of different things, and it's
Yeah.
just kind of another way of seeing the author and the storyteller express themselves. And there's definitely something to be said about having more layers. I feel like you can never go wrong with more layers. And with like Nimona specifically, I've actually experienced it two different ways because I got the audio version, which I wasn't exactly sure how that was going to work, considering it's a graphic novel.
Yeah.
But it works really well as a companion piece to, like, while you're reading through the graphic novel, listening to a full cast of voice actors kind of voice acting all the dialogue. But it really contrasts with how much narration has to be added without pictures. Like, without the artwork, they have to describe things a lot more. And they don't go into a lot of detail. Like, if you had just listened to the audio version and didn't read the graphic novel beforehand, you would not know what any of the characters look like. They don't describe them or anything. They leave it up to you, besides like very minor details here and there, like Nemona's hair color. They mentioned at two different points because she changes it partway through. But beyond that, you don't know what any of them look like. And you can kind of see how they change the dialogue to kind of place you. Like, if two characters are talking to each other, they have to add in the names of the characters, even if that wasn't in the original dialogue, so you can kind of keep track of who's talking.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So it was kind of a unique experience to kind of go through the novel again while listening to the audio in the background. It was actually really kind of cool. So yeah.
Yeah. Every time I pick up a book, I'm pretty used to just straight text. I haven't been one to read any sort of graphic novels. I did a little bit in middle school, but like I grabbed this because, as you were talking, it's like 800 pages of just straight text with, maybe a photo every 50 pages. And I think that the like adding images, just definitely, you can change the story and get some different things out of it and maybe capture your reader more. Just based on what you guys have been you've all been saying, that maybe there's a different, because I'm used to just reading words and creating pictures in my head, whereas when you can like, I'll create a picture, but maybe you can answer this, does having different photos across maybe make it more like a film or something, where there's a little bit more vivid of a storyline? I'm just trying to think, because I haven't.
Like more like a scene board?
Yeah, more like a scene board, or instead of just reading and thinking about different points in the conversation, you could see how the conversation would take place because there's photos to help you see that. I haven't read much of these, so I'm interested in what the experience of reading them is like.
I mean, there's pluses and minuses from my experience. Like, I've read a lot of manga as well. And a big drawback you can actually get from manga is if the artist is not good at placing their scenes and like moving the boxes in the right order, it can kind of get confusing during certain scenes. Like, because it's just like watching a movie that's edited improperly. Like, if you have like a car chase or a fight scene or something, and you don't know the general geography of where it's taking place, you can kind of get lost in it. But I mean, it does definitely add a layer, I feel. I mean, the thing that it does kind of take away from you, though, is you don't get to imagine what the characters look like. You don't get to imagine what's happening because it's kind of like right there for you. So it kind of takes it away from you. If you're somebody who really likes that.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's also just about being used to it too, because sometimes when you're first reading it, it's like, wait, I'm not used to pictures. But I guess another like positive to graphic novels in general is like you see like collaboration, because sometimes it is done by the writer, but then most of the time it's like a writer and like an artist. Most of the time they just work together a lot.
Interesting.
They collaborate a lot. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. I definitely think it's like kind of like watching a movie with subtitles but on mute. It's not like anything, but you know what's going on. Pretty great. And I also think it's a lot less daunting. Like, the idea for most people picking up like an 800-page book is just like, I can't, what? 800? That's crazy. But, 300, 400 pages of a graphic novel is maybe the equivalent of 50 pages. That's kind of a stretch. So I feel like it's a lot easier for people who aren't used to reading to kind of get into reading graphic novels, comic books than, something. Something they're used to doing. And I agree with what you said earlier, Jeremy. There's a lot less fluff with graphic novels. You don't have to take the time to explain what things look like. So you're not spending like 2 pages like the castle looked like this. There were ramparts that were gray and then there was a broken one or whatever. And you don't have these like pointless descriptors that kind of detract from the flow where it's like, oh, they tucked a loose strand of hair behind their ear or their shirt was disheveled. Like you can physically see that on the page. And I think that also makes it more immersive in some ways because you have a lot more elements. You have the word, you have the visual, and all of that stuff. And I also kind of disagree with you, Jer, in the sense that I find when I read a traditional novel, I read a lot of fantasy and there are a lot of fight scenes. And sometimes I'm reading and I have no idea how the characters wound up where they got, if I just like kind of lapse into like a trance kind of when I read. And the graphic novel kind of helps me with that instead of me having to go back like 3 pages and be like, well, what happened? And the other thing which no one mentioned was the fact that I think these kinds of books can help people learn a second language or a third language, just learn a language in general. And it's because, when you're learning, usually you get your spelling wrong, you kind of screw up your tenses, you don't really know what you're doing. But if you have some sort of visual to support your idea of what you think is being said, I feel like it might be easier to grasp what you're learning. Does anyone have anything else to say, or have we kind of finished with that topic? I don't know why I forgot that.
I think that's true though, because I grew up around a lot of people that like you can actually learn like another language, because I read some manga and like they like read from like right to left, like how they do certain things, like, and it taught me a lot about their culture. But also I grew up in a racially diverse community, so I just learned about it. I was kind of immersed in it already. So yeah, I think it can.
From like a cultural immersion standpoint, manga is a really good example because a lot of their humor, like Japanese humor, a lot of it's based off of kanji. Like you'll see a lot of visual gags that if you don't know anything about the kanji behind it, like the written language, a lot of the jokes don't make sense because they'll make comparisons to what the different words look like when they're written, and they'll show visual gags based off of that. And that's like really prevalent in a lot of manga, and it kind of doesn't translate. Like it's a sign of a good translation if the humor still comes through in translated manga.
Yeah, it's definitely like an understanding of the culture kind of too. You need to ask a few people and be like, oh, okay, so that was humor. Oh, got it. Okay. Yeah. It's like when people are learning like Shakespeare or something and you're like, what?
Yeah, it's so true.
You got to have that page on the opposite side that translated into normal English.
Like, easy to read Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Totally true. So I think that one of the questions Nimona raises is what makes someone evil, because when you look at the 2 main characters outside of Nimona, Golden Loin and Blackheart, you have these 2 characters that are labeled good and evil, but they don't really fit the mold that they're given. So I guess, what do you guys think? What makes someone a bad person or an evil person?
There's so many things.
I know, it's a loaded question. It's a big question.
Yeah. I think honestly, those people don't think that they're evil most of the time.
That's true.
Just from acting training that I have received, basically. And I don't know, it's a motivation thing. Like they have like a certain motivation, and most of the time it's an insecurity.
It's fair.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like a lot of the questions that are raised in Nimona are based on like what you're labeled as versus what you actually are. I was trying to find the specific page where he talks about like his moral code versus like society's moral code, and I can't find it. But he like Blackheart like lives by his own code, no matter what people say that he's like. They say that he's the evil person, that he's the bad guy, that he's the one who's trying to like tear the kingdom down. But he honestly lives by morals that are higher than what seemed to be expected of him, and certainly like what the antagonists in the novel end up um, living up to, and they're like supposed to be the good guys. And I think that's kind of where it kind of makes you look at how people see themselves as individuals versus how society sees you, and how harmful labels can actually be. Like they can send you down um, like a road where you're trying to live up to something, whether it's good or bad, that you were labeled from early on in your life, and it can kind of really impact you and impact your place in society, which is kind of like a cycle on how you treat yourself, how everybody treats you.
Yeah.
It's fair. A little delay there. I mean, my instincts tell me that it's partially a label, but when you look at the root word like evil, it's, literally a wicked person. So I feel like even though someone might be called evil, they're not necessarily bad. It's about actions. Like if you're killing people, you're evil. It's not really debatable. If you're, hurting small children and I don't know, kidnapping them and doing, crazy, not nice stuff, you're evil. But until you get to that point, you're not really there. I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
No,
Yeah,
I think that's fair.
I once heard somebody describe it as like evil is somebody or something that intentionally brings suffering into the world. Like there's plenty of bad things going on, and then evil comes out when somebody adds to that suffering, whether it's revenge or they're angry or something like that. They just add. They want to add, maybe to get back at somebody, but it's that action of adding to the pain in the world that makes somebody or something that they do evil. I've always liked that definition.
It's a really good definition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the kind of thought on that you guys have on towards like the ends justify the means kind of thing? Because that's kind of a question that's kind of raised in this too. Like some of the things that are done in the name of like making the kingdom stronger, or like trying to present a strong front and become powerful for the betterment of the kingdom, are going through like means that many would consider evil. Like, what are you guys' kind of thoughts on that?
So then in that case, you're saying that there's a lot of shades of gray, it sounds like, where people aren't either good or evil. They may do some evil things, but they're not inherently evil. It's just that whatever circumstances they're surrounded with, they end up inflicting something evil upon others in order to either make betterment for themselves or for a group, for their group of people.
Yeah,
I think it lies a lot. Like every individual has the choice to make, and people always go, "Do you think humans are inherently good or inherently bad?" And I think that we're both inherently good and also inherently very bad. And it's a lot of the time, what is the situation that we're in and how we're going to adapt to that. And so the ends justify the means is always a tricky thing for me, because what exactly are the ends that you're going towards? Is it actually something good, or is it just something good for you that you're trying to work on? So I would have to read the book to be able to apply it here.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. Like, I don't know. I've never like I never really understood what the ends justify the means really meant. So it's basically just like you do this really bad thing, but you also do this really good thing. So that kind of evens it out.
It's like they're it's a character or a person trying to reach a goal that they believe is a benevolent goal, but doing bad things to get there.
Okay.
Like in the case of Nimona specifically, like the institute doing experimentation underneath the kingdom, and doing weapon tests and playing with things that could do harm to people in order to make the kingdom powerful, to make weapons that would prevent other kingdoms from invading them. So it's kind of presented as they believe that they're doing the right thing, but they don't care how it affects the common man. It just makes the kingdom strong.
Like how Wolverine was made, kind of. Basically. Yeah.
Like, I mean, the Weapon X program didn't care what they did to the people in the Weapon X program. They just they wanted to make their weapons that could fight for them.
Yeah. They were tested on like animals. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think? Is that worth it, or where do you draw the line?
I mean, I definitely think that in the book it's framed as a negative.
Mm-hmm.
That like it's not. That's kind of thrown out as almost like an excuse to do the things that they want to do. It's like, oh, but we're trying to make the kingdom strong. Like a strong kingdom is a kingdom that never has to go to war because it works as a deterrent. But it really just seems like they just want to do those things. They want to get power, and they're just using that as an excuse, as a justification.
Sounds like the Iraq War.
Yeah.
For sure.
Kind of sounds like most modern wars in general.
For sure. Yeah. And there's like a lot of political stuff in like graphic novels. I always see them. So it's, and comic books, especially comic books.
Oh, I mean,
they get very political.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Somebody like Captain America started out with like his first cover was him punching Hitler.
Yeah,
like, it was war. It was war propaganda, basically.
Yeah, I remember hearing about, maybe it was the Superman novels, that once Superman got, so it was a big Cold War novel, and he just kept getting more powerful and more powerful until I think like nuclear bombs could bounce off of him, and nobody could ever beat Superman, and that's when it started to get really boring because you can't beat Superman. And then is that when Kryptonite came around, and finally Superman's weak and he has a weakness. Now they're fun and attractive again, but even though they were so political, just trying to push that like the Cold War narrative all the way until it's basically breaking point where the politics just became too much.
I don't know anything about Superman.
I know nothing about any superhero stuff. This is stuff that I've heard.
They even had an Elseworld comic where what would happen if Superman landed in the Soviet Union instead of America, and they had like communist Superman. They actually touched on it this season on Supergirl on the television show. Where there was like communist Supergirl. I haven't watched most of the episodes yet, but I know that it was touched on. So that's kind of interesting. Comic books get very political. It's one of the more political mediums.
Interesting.
Yeah. No kidding.
No, I wouldn't think that. Having never read them, I would have never thought that.
Yeah.
So that's really
that's cool. I'm glad you know now.
Yeah.
It's important to know that, because I think that's like one of the reasons why comic books get demeaned, because they think it's not saying anything, which is also kind of an excuse, because like if someone were to say, oh, they're trying to do this, they could be like, no, we're just entertaining people. I don't know what you're talking about. We have no idea.
Yep.
It's kind of interesting to look at it from the perspective of how the MCU is like the biggest thing in movies right now. That comics are becoming, or comic culture is becoming mainstream at this point, but still people, like the vast majority of people, still aren't reading comics. They
Yeah.
still look at comics as kind of a kid's medium. But the stories that everybody loves out of MCU and all that came out of comics. Like all that stuff, those were stories that were told through comics decades ago.
Mhm.
Like the original Infinity Gauntlet comics were, I don't know how long, but decades upon decades ago. And now they're just being made into like popular movies now.
Mhm.
I think it's because people want like action in movies. I think that's the biggest reason. And like a story. And I'm like, well, they've always been there. I don't understand. Yeah.
Excellent.
We all stare at each other. You can
Yeah.
talk. I'm done. Does anyone have anything to add, or we're all talked out? We're talking. All right. Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Comic books.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Elaine.
No problem.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming,
Yeah.
Jer, being my guest, and thanks everyone else for participating. Not to lump you together, but hope everyone has a good day. Bye,
You
guys.
too.
Okay. Bye.
Okay, you know what? She didn't stop the live stream.
Uh-oh.